Today's date is Sunday, the 6th of June, 2021, and the current local time is 7:12 p.m. And this recording is being done live from Nassau, the Bahamas. And this is our final masterclass period. We've been doing these masterclasses for the last 12 weeks, and it's been super cool to just be in this space and share space with so many of you, and to have you bring your vulnerability, have you bring your charts, have you bring your family members' charts, and have you just share this space in this sort of way, because this is astrology in action, and the world needs more demonstrations of astrology in action. And I'm super happy to have been able to have facilitated that for you for the past couple of weeks. And this evening, we're going to dive in by just reading the charts. We're going to read the charts from beginning to end, and we're going to see what comes up. And I hope that you will learn something, and I hope that you enjoy it, and I hope that it truly gives you something to sink your teeth into and to think about. So without further ado, let us dive right in. And the information for those of you who want to follow is that this is a female chart, and the date of birth is the 2nd of June, 1982, and the time of birth is 3:03 p.m. in Douglasville, Georgia. We are using the tropical zodiac, Regiomontanus houses, and the true node. So, in following our rubric in a light sort of way, we take a look at the ascendant. This is an early ascendant. Usually we feel a little bit iffy about early ascendants, but this is a pretty finely nuanced birth time in terms of the person being born at 3:03 p.m. So we're going to go ahead and trust this ascendant. The ascendant is 1 degree Libra, 37 minutes, and that makes both the D3 and the D12 be Libra. So this is a Libra situation that we have going on here. Secondly, we want to take a look at the hidden things, the things that aren't as obvious. So hidden stuff. Hidden stuff number 1 is that the antition / contra antition / contra antition of this ascendant is going to be 29 degrees Pisces and 29 degrees Virgo. We look and we see anything at 29 Pisces or Virgo. The answer to that question is no on both accounts. And so we move on. We take a look at our declination table, see do we have anything going on with this ascendant. We have the Mars. The Mars, which is clearly the planet that's rising in this chart, is also what's going on with the ascendant. So we have Mars by declination. I truthfully don't care if it's a parallel or a contra-parallel, but here it is definitely Mars parallel the ASC. The next thing that we would do is we would take a look at the octile aspects, and I know that 1 degree of the cardinal signs is equaling 16 degrees of the fixed signs. So we take a look and see, do we see anything at 16 fixed? And the answer is another no. So there's nothing at 16 fixed. And we go on the it would be 16 fixed as well as 23 cardinal, truthfully. So if we were to pull this chart up on the dial, we would see this Pluto coming up as being in aspect to the ascendant. So let me just do that so that you all see what that looks like. And this is a point of spiral education, just so that you could truly see what goes on in my brain whenever I look at things, even though this isn't the point of us looking at this chart this evening. But in my brain, for me, that Pluto is having a relationship with the ascendant as well. So if I put the point on my ascendant, as you can see, I have my Pluto being drawn in by the 22.5 dot, because the Pluto is roughly 22.5 degrees away from both the ascendant and the midheaven, which makes this Pluto a humongous deal within the life of this person, as well as within this person's presentation within the world. And those are the hidden things to the ascendant. Now, from there, we go on to the obvious stuff. The obvious stuff is clearly planets in ASC. Clearly, our Mars is obvious to us. Saturn is also obvious to us. And we already know the relationship that the Pluto has to the ascendant, even though by virtue of the 5-degree rule, the Pluto technically isn't in the ascendant. This chart is going to be a doozy to read, and we're going to read it. So we have the Mars, we have the Saturn, and we already have the Pluto situation going on. Now we have aspects to the ASC, and at 1 degree of cardinal, we have the Uranus in a sextile to the ascendant. Neptune is a non-factor, the node is a non-factor, the Venus is a non-factor, and even if it was, it would be in conjunct. However, we have this Venus in a direct sesquiquadrate with the Mars, which is telling. So we have Venus is in a 150 with Mars, which is important because Mars is the planet rising, and that is not good at all in terms of whatever love story we may yet tell about this person's chart situation. We have the Mercury and the Sun. They're not doing what we need for them to be doing, and the node, once again, is not doing anything of import. I want to drop on Chiron just because we've been doing this Chiron exploratory, and it's well worth our efforts to include Chiron into the fray. So we have Chiron at 24 degrees. All right. Then the final thing that we do after we take a look at the aspects to the ascendant is we take a look ultimately at the ruler of the ascendant, which is this Venus, which is technically doing well in the 8th house. And whatever else we have to say about that Venus will come in due time. Interestingly enough, we have a yod pattern going on with this Venus, because we have Venus having her in conjunct with Uranus, or her quincunx to Uranus, a quincunx with Mars, and the Uranus and the Mars have a sextile relationship. This is quite an extraordinary chart. The very first thing that we see about this chart, because we cannot help but see it, is the fact that Mars is rising here. And Mars within this chart is ruling her partner. Mars within this chart is also ruling the 8th house of the partner's finances. Mars is also ruling the 3rd house of the siblings. So if we had to use Mars as a ruler of the partner, what we would say is that the partner is leaning very heavily and oftentimes too heavily on our native in general. So that's the first thing that we see, that this person allows herself, our native, this lady, allows herself to be leaned on extraordinarily by her partner in ways that are debilitating and in ways that are excessive, because for whatever reason, she seems to be the one with an upper hand, and that upper hand may be an upper hand financially, that upper hand may be an upper hand in terms of her own placement within the world. But the very first thing that we see is that her effect, or the effect of her partners on her, has been excessive beyond measure. Now, this is an interesting place for us to start our discussion because with Libra rising, we have a cardinal air sign ruled by Venus as being on the cusp of the ascendant. And the air says that the chief operating system of this woman is going to be her ability to create connections and her ability to initiate beautiful connections with others. And beautiful connections are usually initiated through the process of relationships. And those relationships can go from friendships, but they can also be the deep, meaningful, intimate relationships that cause us to fall in love with others. So we already see that there's an excessive amount of the love bug within this person's life, and there's an excessive amount of the love bug on this person's understanding of who she is as a person. And her willingness to form relationships with others can be a part of her own set of sufferings in life because we all have our sufferings. And her desire and willingness to form relationships with others can be a part of her own suffering story because of, once again, how heavily she is pressed upon by her partner, but because of how much she allows that partner to press upon her and about how much she allows herself to compromise in order to accommodate the partner's desires or to accommodate the partner being present within her life. Now, from the perspective of her being Venus ruled, the Venus component within all of us is a component that wants to hold soft space for others. It's a component that wants to hold lovely, loving space for others. And Venus as a concept in life doesn't want to be, it doesn't want to be pressed upon by others. It doesn't want to be rushed by others. It doesn't want to be forced by others. So as we see this, we ask ourselves, how can someone so Venusian in herself willingly submit herself to being so deeply influenced and pressed upon by others to the point where she finds herself in situations where she is the one essentially being caretaker or essentially playing the role of caretaker insofar as the partner is concerned? Now, we haven't taken into acknowledgement the way in which this Mars is also ruling the third house, and that Mars ruling the third house bears complications in terms of her siblings and in terms of how her siblings relate to her. And I'll tell you all a story in a bit about one time I saw a similar configuration to this. But the point of the matter here is that Venus does not willingly allow herself to be pressed on or pressed into by others because of Venus being so deeply invested in the notion of her own comfort. And we know that Venus likes to be comfortable because Venus is the goddess of love. Venus is Aphrodite. Venus is Oshun. Venus is a goddess who lives on sweets and honey. And she doesn't really want to be leaned into too deeply by anyone, because if you lean in and encroach on that space that she's established for herself, it makes her feel as if she doesn't have the ability to be her expansive, luxurious self if she's too heavily depended on. Also, another thing about Venus is that Venus in general is not quick to act. Now, the conundrum that we see here is that we have Mars rising, and Mars in general, when we see Mars rising within the nature of a person, we want to think that that person is quick to act. But this Mars is in Libra, and that Libra is ruled by that Venus in Taurus. So there is a sense that the place where she may be creating quick action is the place of the creation of relationships. But the next question we have is, but after creating those relationships, does she turn into a repiner? Repining is a word that we oftentimes find within our medieval astrological texts. And repining refers to people who complain about the things that they've created within their lives, or people who just complain about their lives in general. So when we see this Mars rising here, we wonder whether or not she's complaining about those relationships that she's formed, because she really is in those relationships, but she's in them as a means of fulfilling the hunger to be in relationship. And at the same time, once that hunger has been fulfilled, she realizes that there is still the voracious hunger that's present in other parts of her life that doesn't make her feel as if the relationships that she's joined are relationships worth necessarily being in. It's the sort of thing where, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, and then I have it. And I'm not so sure I really want this in that sort of way anymore. Is what we see when we see the Mars in Libra being ruled by the Venus in Taurus. Mars rising by itself usually has the ability to give a person a great deal of courage and a great deal of spiritedness and a great deal of zeal and a great deal of passion, an overall sense of the passion that this person has for life. But specific to this lady, her passions may be manifesting directly into how she forms space with others, how she forms relationships with others. And it's a very relationship heavy sort of situation that we have going on here. There's a sense that I live in the world and the world lives within me, and people find themselves in my home more often than not. And I find myself entertaining people more often than not, because once again, people may look at me and think that I, as this Venus in Taurus in the eighth house, I'm someone who's well off in a way where I can be able to support them. And we see the story of her being well off in several places. She has that same Venus in Taurus ruling the second house. The second house is the house of her personal finances. And while the moon is there, which causes fluctuations within her personal finances, she has the moon Jupiter conjunction. And the moon Jupiter conjunction can oftentimes have to deal with a sense of family or hereditary wealth. And she also has the Saturn rising within this chart, and the Saturn is exalted but retrograde. And the exalted Saturn also has to do with the sense of hereditary wealth as well, as in the wealth of my father, the wealth of my home, the wealth of my family comes to me. And when the wealth of our family comes directly to us, we wonder, have I inherited the wealth of my ancestors? Have I inherited and am therefore living on the wealth of my ancestors? Venus in the eighth house can indicate someone living on the wealth of the departed, particularly because Venus here is in Taurus, and so it indicates a sense of her living on the wealth of those who have gone before, i.e. living on the wealth of her ancestors. And the Saturn rising also carries the same connotation. However, this Saturn rising is also retrograde. And we want to ask ourselves questions about this as to why that should be the case. So, the Saturn is ruling the fourth house, and the fourth house represents the father as well as the family. And so Saturn rising within this chart shows that this is a woman not just indelibly pressed upon by her partner, i.e. that Mars, but this is a woman also very much indelibly pressed upon by her family, i.e. that Saturn rising. So Saturn and Mars representing both the greater and the lesser malefic is already a bit of a problem. But because of what they represent, it's also even more of a problem, because we don't feel as if this lady is having the sort of proper boundaries within her life to really tell the family no, or even to really tell the partner no, because she seems as if she's deeply beholden to both, as if she's both beholden to the partner, but as if she's both beholden to the family as well. Now, from a physical perspective of the physical body, Mars rising in this sort of way can indicate a scar in the face close to the forehead. And the reason why we say scar in the face close to the forehead is because Mars is closer to the cusp of this first house. And when we have a planet that's close to the cusp of the first house, if we take the first house as being our face, our mask that we wear within the world, we want to see what planets are in that first house that are having something to do with the mask that we wear within the world. So Mars being so close to the cusp of the ascendant could have to do with the scar in the face. And like I said, very close to the forehead, probably even close to the hairline because of the relationship of Mars to the cusp of the first house. But we also have Saturn as the second malefic, also in this first house. And if that Saturn were that Mars, we would also be having a noticeable mark of noticeable, and that mark can be a discoloration, a point of darkness. Also, it could also be a scar happening within the Saturnian region here, which would be close to the nose as well. So we have a scar in the forehead, a scar in there to the nose as well, if we were to use Saturn in the same way that we use that Mars. The other thing is that we have both malefics in the first house, and both the malefics in the first house, it's just not a nice thing in general. Mars here ruling the eighth house, which we know is a house of death, and rising within this chart could have to do with difficulty in terms of delivery, as in her specific difficult delivery that we find being represented, her difficult delivery from the womb of her mother, which is a story that she would probably know about. And it also has an interesting analogy with her being in situations that are oftentimes life-threatening. And we say life-threatening because we have the ruler of the eighth house conjunct the cusp of the first house. And so that causes a person's relationship to life-threatening things to be that much more increased, because it puts them in the line of fire for accidents, but it also puts them in the line of fire for things that may be life-threatening. Now, the fact that the Venus is in the eighth house set in Taurus is a wonderful thing in that regard, because when the planet is in its own sign and in a negative house, as this Venus is in her own sign and in the eighth house, it has the ability to save a person from the negative things of that house and bring them the good fortunes of that house. So here we have this Venus in the eighth house, and we have a feeling that yes, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I am saved in general from death, and the good things associated with the eighth house are things that I inherit, i.e., the inheritance, the money of others, the money of, we have the Mars rising in Libra, which could also be an indication of the money that I receive as a result of the passing of a spouse. Could also be a thing there that my life is supported. Everywhere we look for this person, we see a sense of her life being supported by not only the goodwill of those within her immediate family space, but also by the financial inheritances that she may have as a result of that. So those are things that we see there thus far. Now, in her second house, she has the moon Pluto. Pluto has to do with death. And it's something I've ignored for a long time, because who likes to say the D word? No one really likes to say the D word, but Pluto has to do with death. Particularly Saturn Pluto has to do with death. And while she doesn't have the specific Saturn Pluto picture in this chart, that is something that caught my attention not too long ago this week. She does have the Pluto here, and she has the moon Pluto. The moon Pluto within the life of a woman, but also within the life of anyone belonging to a family, can oftentimes be that this person was foisted into the role of secret keeper within the family. And we say secret keeper because the moon Pluto is having an energy of the darkness that occurs within this family circle. The darkness that occurs specifically with my mother is a darkness that we don't talk about, and it's a darkness that is kept under wraps within my own consciousness that I am prevented from revealing to the world at large when we have the moon Pluto. And that's an interesting combination, moon Pluto, While we don't have the moon also within the quincunx of the Chiron, it's doing things in my mind because I kind of see it as well. And so we have this person appointed as secret keeper, but we have to ask ourselves, what happens when we appoint a child as secret keeper at far too early an age? Basically, one, that child, there's a lot of things that happen when we appoint a child as secret keeper at far too early an age. And the best case scenario is that that child matures quickly, or the child grows up sooner than the child needed to grow up. And that child grows up because they're forced within a situation where they're having to carry the secrets of adults, or this person is forced into situations where she's having to carry the secrets of her mother, specifically because we have the Moon Pluto connection. The other thing that happens, that can happen, is that people can sometimes dissociate as a result of being forced into experiences of trauma in terms of their family unit at moments that are far too fast for them to even fathom. And so it forces a person into having two very distinct personalities. Now, we don't feel as if this is something that threatens this person specifically, because the Saturn within this chart is having a trine relationship between the Sun and the Mercury. So we do feel as if there's a great deal of sobriety in terms of how this person is carrying herself within the world, because Sun Saturn as well as Mercury Saturn has to do with sobriety and balance in how I'm thinking, sobriety and balance in how I'm showing up, sobriety and balance and stability in terms of the responsibilities that I find myself being, that I find foisted upon me by my family members, a sense of stability and sobriety and goodness. Because based on what we've said thus far, we need this person to be a stable, sober person, because she's already coming in out of the hatchet, having the toils of her family that she inherits at an early age and that she has to hold within herself at an early age. Moon Pluto in this sort of way, in this combination, can be a sense of darkness that occurs to mother, i.e., a sense of violence that is occurring specifically to mom, a sense of overwhelming manipulation of mom. The other side of this can also be with the Moon Pluto, if we don't want to view it through the perspective that Moon Pluto can also be going down into the belly of the underworld as a result of mom. It can also be that mom herself was the force of Pluto within the life of this person. And we have to look at that a bit more to see whether or not we actually believe that that's true. But those are two sides of the equation. As a result of the passing of mom, I go through a Plutonian experience within my life of being dragged down to the underworld. And the flip side of that could be the over manipulativeness of mom could be a source of Plutonian energy within my life that is more than any one person should have to bear, essentially. So both of those things are caught up within the dynamic of the story of mom that we're telling within this chart, not just because the moon is the general significator of mother, but because the moon is also the specific significator of mother by virtue of the moon ruling the 10th house. So there's that. Now, curiouser and curiouser still, this is a diurnal chart, which means that the triplicity ruler of the 10th house in the first triplicity ruler of the 10th house in the daytime chart represents mother. The first triplicity ruler of the 4th house in the daytime chart also represents the father. And within this chart, having Cancer, Capricorn, the first triplicity rule of water signs in the diurnal chart is Venus, and also the first triplicity ruler of earth signs in the diurnal chart is also Venus. So we have both parents being represented by this same Venus. And why that is peculiar to us is because this Venus is in the eighth house. And so the entire family story, for all intents and purposes, is to be found within the eighth house of this person, which is a house of stress. It's a house of silent suffering in the dark as well, because the eighth house is epicatophora, us falling into the underworld. And they're doing good there insofar as it's Venus in Taurus. So we do still feel as if the fortunes of the eighth house or the fortunes of death are what this person is receiving within her own life. But we can't shake the fact that having the triplicity rule of both my parents in the eighth house is very much also indicative of the death that is central within this family, which could specifically be the death of one parent, but Venus is representing both parents. So it's showing that the ramifications of immediate death or the ramifications of close death within my life are things that directly impact me and things that also directly impact my concept of family within the world as well. Now that is Venus is picking up the Jupiter, and we already spoke about the wealth that might be coming as a result of all of this. So we definitely see the implications and the ramifications of death as a consistent theme within the family circle, but we also see the implications of that which the family leaves behind might specifically be left behind to this person. So the next thing that we have here, and we are going to come to the conclusion of this chart in short order. The next thing that we have here is that the third house, if the third house represents siblings, then the siblings are an interesting thing because we have the Venus in a direct quincunx relationship with the siblings. And that, as we know, is a non-relationship. A quincunx is a non-relationship, a relationship that's doing its endeavor best to not be a relationship. And with Venus quincunx the siblings, it is going out of its way to show us how much these two things are not in relationship. And so when we see that, we want to ask ourselves, why do we have a person going out of their own way to be in such a non-relationship with the siblings in her life? And it's peculiar because nothing else in this chart is as strong as that Venus and that Mars situation. I saw this once, and the one time I saw this before was in the chart of a lady who every day of her life that she can remember growing up was sexually abused by her brother, her younger brother, actually. And she was actively raped by her younger brother for the extent of her childhood until she could arrive to a place where she could run away from that. And that was a constant theme in her life as a child growing up. And of course, he used all the gaslighting in the world for that to not be something that was reported. But she felt as if the parents were in on it, as well. So she also had a very well, she had the same Mars, basically. She had the same Mars in Libra rising representing the siblings. And we also see Uranus is there within that house of the siblings, and Uranus is casting its quincunx to the Venus, but Uranus is also casting its sextile to the siblings. So, what might this mean within the grand scope of things? If there are siblings within the life of this person, which as of now we don't know because we didn't ask, but if there are siblings within the life of this person, the feeling is that the siblings and the impact that the siblings is having on the life of this person is all together too closely interwoven with this person's identity. And no one should really have that sort of overwhelming impact on a person's identity. No one, not any spouse. And we see the same thing happening with the spouse. So, what we begin to see is this patterning that can oftentimes be passed down from a family into our intimate relationships and down onto us as people. So, possibly the same overbearing situation that we have here with the Mars ruling the siblings, being the planet that's rising within this chart, is the same overbearing karmic story that she finds herself going through in terms of her siblings. And we want, us sitting here reading this chart, want for her to be able to find the ability to break free of that type of suffering, if that suffering is essentially what we think it is. And the reason why we feel as if this has set her up to continuously break free from that type of suffering is because Venus is in the quincunx of the Mars, but Venus is also in the quincunx with the Uranus. And so we ask ourselves, is this a situation where this person, because of whatever the sibling story is, that it sets her up to have Venus-Uranus sorts of relationships to her love life? And what that could indicate is a love life that is here today and gone today, because that's a Venus-Uranus manifestation of a love life. It's here right now and it's gone right now as well. And this is peculiar, and the reason why it's peculiar is because with Libra rising, we get the feeling that this is a person who deeply and wholeheartedly wants love. And this is a person who deeply and wholeheartedly moves through the world with this desire of love and this desire to be in love. She also has Venus Jupiter by declination, and the Venus Jupiter by declination is yearning eagerly for the fulfillment of love's desire. These are things that matter to her possibly more than anything else. The ability to be with, the ability to be held, the ability to be loved, the ability to know that there is another with whom my heart is being shared becomes a very major part of this woman's searching for things within life. But the contact between the Venus and the Mars by quincunx shows a breakage of that relationship, which could very well be an indication of it shows a breakage in that relationship. And if it is the siblings that we're referring to, it can be a breakage of the relationship with the siblings because of all the reasons in which the siblings are far too deeply a part of my nature and I need to break free from that. But then the other thing could be, if this follows through as a pattern into marital relationships, it can be a breakage in terms of the marital bond as well, i.e. through divorce, by virtue of the fact that the Venus is in this yard relationship between the Uranus and the Mars there. So stability and the stabilization of a love life that feels stable and of a love life that doesn't have the codependent signatures that are represented within this chart are some of the things that we're wanting for this person to find and to acquire and to hold on to within herself. This Saturn being here ruling the fourth house and retrograde in the first house is saying that father, for all intents and purposes, had all of the appearances of being a better version of himself by virtue of the exaltation. Father had all of the appearances of being a better version of himself, save for one thing. And that one thing is the retrogradation, because retrogradation in relationship to a strong planet is like a fly within your soup. It's a sense of this entire castle is so perfect, save for one thing. There's one thing going on within the story of the father that doesn't allow him to be able to stabilize in a way that feels truly fulfilling. And one of the ways how that can happen in relationship to father is dad may be present, but dad may be constantly involved with work and therefore not present for me. And that's the soft version of it, because retrogradation actively means something happening within the body of the planet that prevents the body of that planet from really delivering on its promise. So with Capricorn or with the South Node in the fourth house, our fundamental question is, what is being weakened? What is being weakened within the body of this household and home that doesn't allow it to deliver on its promise? What is being weakened within the body of this household and home that doesn't allow it to be the sort of household and home environment that we essentially want for it to be? What is being detracted from my situation, essentially, that doesn't allow it to be a better situation than what it actually is? Now, this also has to do with the inheritance that this person may receive from the father, because she is having the Saturn retrograde, but in a trine relationship to the parts of fortune, which means that from the inheritance front of things, that seems as if from the inheritance front of things, it seems as if there should be an inheritance that feels sizable to her. And that inheritance could very well be in terms of the family business, the family store, the family real estate. Any of those things that I inherit from the family could be signified by that, by virtue of the trine relationship between the Saturn and the part of fortune. The inheritance that I have, or the money that I have, is had within this land, basically, because of Saturn's rulership of those things in general. The other thing that we have here, and we are going to wrap this up because I do want to get to another chart this evening, but the thing that gave me pause here is the story of money in general for this person, which is truly a very big deal within the life of this person. The monetary life of this person is truly a humongous deal. And the reason for me why that's truly a humongous deal is because the second house, if we were to break the second house out into triplicity rulers, what we find is that in this diurnal chart, Saturn would be the first triplicity ruler of the second house, representing this person's money at the beginning of life, which is, my Saturn is exalted, but. Mercury would be the second triplicity ruler of the second house, representing this person's money in the middle of her life, which is, my Mercury is in his own domicile and therefore doing well and therefore doing great, but. And then the final triplicity rule would be the Jupiter in Scorpio retrograde in the second house itself, saying, it is my wealth, it is my finances, it is the things that occur within my life in relationship to wealth and finances, and particularly the money that I acquire within my life from death, that becomes the major crux of my life within the third portion of my life. So at every portion of the life, we're seeing this heavy monetary emphasis, which could be a wonderful thing. And it comes with its stuff, because we have the moon and we have the Pluto there within that second house as well. And moon Pluto money that I acquire through Moon Pluto isn't necessarily money that I want, is something that is there and that should be known as well. Now, in wrapping this completely up, from a psychological perspective, Sun and Mercury in the ninth house are representing this person's deep desire for continued learning and understanding and the acquisition of information and the expanding of her mind through the information that she's bringing in. And so it makes her a sharp shooter in terms of the way in which her mind works, and it makes her extraordinarily intelligent. And the sobriety of Saturn causes her mind to work in an even more stable, grounded, practical sort of way, which we love for anybody because it makes this person not only into a good student, but it also makes this person into a good learner by virtue of having the Sun and the Mercury retrograde in the ninth house. The Mercury retrograde, as representing faculties of the mind, has distraction as its constant thing. She also has Mercury Uranus, and Mercury Uranus is one of the signs of someone who has a deficit in terms of the attention that they're actually able to give to life. It's as if I use my mind, not intentionally to check out, but my mind oftentimes causes me to check out. And before I know it, people are saying that I have an attention deficit. I'm not able to focus. I'm not able to concentrate. I'm not able to really pour my mind into one specific direction. Let's see what's happening to the Mercury by declination. Mercury is 19 and the Uranus is 9 and the Uranus is 20. And the Mercury Uranus can cause a person to be greatly inventive, as in, oh, wow, you came up with that idea. Who would have thunk it? Or, oh, wow, you came up with that idea and you solved that problem. Who would have known that was possible? Or, oh, wow, look at you finding these solutions. Who would have known that that's something that was even a thing that could be done, period? Which is great, but the Uranus on the mind doesn't really allow the mind to be stable. And we are grateful for this person that she has the Saturn there, the Mercury trining the Saturn, because the Saturn serves as a corrective measure in terms of her mind. And so even though the attention deficit, I don't want to say disorder, but even though the attention deficit title might very well be there as something that might be struggled with, she finds ultimately the ability to draw on that Saturn as a resource later on within life. There are many bajillion other things that could be said here about this. We're not going to say all of them at all. But in conclusion of this very long reading, a focus on career for this person would be a point of remediation. A focus on a career that involves higher education and learning could be points of remediation within the life of this person. And we say that as a result of what's going on with the ascendant ruler also being the ninth house ruler, that a focus on a career that involves higher education could be a point of great remediation within the life of this person, because it allows this person to not only be a student, but possibly also one day become a teacher and give back from her own life experiences, which is something that's really a great thing to be able to do. Also, a person like this could very well stand in line to be something of a defender of people. And by defender of people, we mean law could be a potential thing that this person is interested in doing, because that could be another point where she's able to deal with and process some of the karmic implications of the life that she has had and pour herself into the legal work that she does as a means of burning karma, or as a means of realigning herself with other stories that just aren't her own. Because as we've seen, the story that she has come into the world inheriting and carrying is one that is a bit much as far as a life is concerned. And so if I can reorient myself around somebody else's story, around fighting for somebody else's cause, then I can figure out my own placement in the world in a better sort of way. Who is this chart belonging to?
This was my goddaughter, who eventually became my adopted daughter.
This was your goddaughter who eventually became your adopted daughter. West, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being accurate, where did this land for you?
9.5, just one thing that I thought was not quite on, but everything else was right on. Well, one of the first things I wrote down was the ability to initiate beautiful connections with others. That defined her in a lot of ways. I mean, this was somebody who could probably love harder than anybody else I've ever known in my life. And it's like everybody who knew her felt that way about her. It's like she had probably 100 people who thought they were her best friends, and she actually could maintain a best friend relationship with them, with all of them. People just completely adored her. But the downside of that is she also tended to adapt herself to what she thought people wanted, because that was so important to her that everybody did. So she would hide parts of herself if she thought it was not something you were going to like. I was really just one of the out of the blue things when you were talking about the scars on the forehead. She was in an auto accident early on where the windshield shattered and the glass all went into her forehead, and she always had scars on her forehead there. Parental really sort of leaning on her a great deal. I would say that was probably very accurate. Her mother was in fact a very Plutonian person. Her father, she loved him a great deal, but he was not very reliable. The one thing that I thought was really kind of off in the thing was the relation with the sister, although it kind of got a little better as you expanded on it, because she's actually very, very close with her sister. They were very much support for each other growing up. But then there were also some strains. They were going to go in business together at one point, and my goddaughter poured herself into making things work into this business. And then at the last minute, her sister decided to accept a tour somewhere and left it there. And that created a rift for a little bit, but mostly they were very close. The facing danger regularly, but getting away from it and turning it into something beautiful. She was actually a aerialist as a profession. So arguably she faced danger and death every day in her profession. The teaching also came in. She, besides performing aerialism, she also taught social circus, which is teaching circus arts to at-risk or underprivileged or special needs children, sorts of thing. It was not a higher education, but it was teaching. Let's see. The inheritance thing, when you also clarified that a little bit, it's a little bit more complicated. They did not have a lot of money when she was young. Her father did come into a lot of money at one point, but then he lost it all again pretty quickly. As part of that, everything slipped away, not very reliable. She would have eventually, if she had lived longer, she died about 4.5 years ago, she would have eventually inherited a nice sum from me. So I guess that counts in there. Partners, her boyfriends worshipped the ground she walked on, and she managed to stay friends with everybody, and they adored her and would do anything for her. But she had this ideal of a relationship in her mind that nobody could ever quite match up to. So in the end, she would always end up deciding it wasn't perfect enough. And, But there was one in particular that she was with for a long time who still, absolutely believed that they were going to get back together in the end, and so forth. Trying to think what else. You didn't talk at all. So the other downside was she tended to be a very escapist, but you didn't really get into that. So
yeah,
a certain amount of self-medication. But mostly, she shone bright and was a beautiful artist and people adored her, but she did not have good boundaries. You were very correct about that. And, and then in the end, she finally had a bad fall and is gone. So I'm not sure what else I've missed.
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that, Wes, and thank you for that, because I've learned a great deal from what you just shared, and I'm sure that everyone here has also learned a great deal from what you just shared as well. And
when you said it was an extraordinary chart, it's like, my first thought was, of course, because she was very much an extraordinary person. So I don't know too many people who ever met her who would disagree with that.
And Wes, if you don't mind me asking, how long ago did she pass?
4.5 years ago.
Okay.
Thanksgiving of 2016.
And was it what you said that she fell, so it was an accident that occurred that was the way in which she lost her life?
Yeah, she was she loved to go sit on top of roofs and look at the stars with friends. They'd take a bottle up and do it. And it was like she'd been doing some shows. She'd actually been working for us and was doing some shows and got off very late and went with a college friend. They were going to go up to the roof and watch the stars. And the friend went up and she went to take her makeup off. And then after a while, she hadn't shown up. So he went to look for her and found her. She'd fallen off the fire escape, which is funny because she climbed for a living.
Wow.
But she also had a very high blood alcohol level. So.
Well, West,
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely, our condolences collectively for your loss, and thank you for being willing to share this even within that,
Well, thank you so much for, giving me more insight.
You're very welcome. Would you be open to me making some commentary on what you just said, that last portion about her self-medication?
Yes.
Okay. So wisdom or hindsight is 2020 always. And here within this chart, what I only started to see after West started to speak, which I'm pretty sure other people here, other Oraculos people saw, was that she is having the Sun Neptune parallel, as well as the Neptune midheaven parallel, which means that she essentially has midheaven, Sun, and Neptune parallel with each other. And Neptune, as we know, is, if there is going to be any planet at all that has to do with self-medication, we can consider Neptune to be the planet that does that to a large degree. And when we have midheaven Neptune, that means that we ourselves identify with Neptune. We become Neptune. Any planet that is very closely complected or closely brought into your midheaven becomes, in a sense, your totem in this lifetime. So if you have Neptune closely complected to your midheaven, that becomes your totem within this lifetime. If you have Pluto complected with your midheaven, I have Pluto midheaven, Pluto becomes your totem within this lifetime. And here we see that she is having the Neptune midheaven. And the Neptune midheaven has to do with exactly what West said, escapism. And it's not just because West said that. Any one of us here would say that Neptune has a relationship with escapism just by virtue of Neptune. So the Sun-Neptune parallel is the equivalent of a Sun-Neptune conjunction. And the Sun-Neptune conjunction already has a porous sense of their boundaries and a porous sense of their relationship to the world. And it has the ability to be a performer or to be essentially an actor, because the Sun-Neptune person is the person who has no specific loyalty to any specific identification. And it has no specific loyalty to any specific sort of mask, because every mask belongs to it. And it moves through the world as a chameleon, in a sense, which allows it to pick up and drop identities at will based on the circumstances that it finds itself in, which is why we find a lot of people who are actors or actresses being Sun-Neptune people or having a strong Neptune, because it allows them to take on a role full-heartedly without the boundary of themselves standing in the way to prevent them from sinking more deeply into the role that they're taking on. So that's one of the things that we find with the Sun-Neptune. But the Sun-Neptune and the midheaven Neptune also have a very deep disillusionment with life. And that's the thing that is at the core of many of the pathologies that we associate with Sun and Neptune. The Sun-Neptune or midheaven Neptune has a very deep disillusionment with life. And that disillusionment with life is oftentimes what causes them or what allows them to be so susceptible to drug use, drug overdose, drug abuse, all of those things, alcoholism, because those substances serve as a point of departure from an otherwise disillusioning experience. And we see a person who has this sort of inclination, and we say, oh, well, you know, sometimes someone's just wanting to imbibe for the sake of having a good time. But this concept of a sake of having a good time it's a symptom, but it's not actually speaking to the inward experience of a person, because beneath the depths of that symptom are oftentimes specific ways in which that person is trying to leave or is trying to escape or trying to be no more, essentially, which is a continuous goal of the Neptunian person. The Neptunian person has a continuous goal of being no more, because Neptune and its lack of boundaries wants to melt into the eternal. That's why things like enlightenment, the experience of enlightenment, is a Neptunian experience, insofar as enlightenment represents the merging of my small self into the larger universal self. So that becomes a part of a Neptunian predicament as well. Sun Neptune also has to do with the idealization of men. Once again, this isn't because West gave us that information, even though that's easy to say after the fact. But if you look in any astrology book, Sun Neptune will be having something to do with the idealization of manfolk within the life of a person, insofar as the Sun is analogous to the father, and insofar as Neptune is analogous to menfolk, we see that she has the sun at 22 degrees north, 13 minutes, and she has the Neptune at 22 degrees south, 3 minutes, which is the contraparallel of Sun and Neptune, which is essentially the equivalent of a Sun-Neptune opposition. Insofar as the Sun also has to do with the father in general, if my father gets Neptuned, then my father has the ability to be both someone who I idealize as well as someone who I'm disillusioned by, because oftentimes our concept of disillusionment is caught up within the things that we idealize when we see that those things that we idealize don't have the ability to actually deliver to us something more substantial. So Sun Neptune as an indicator of the father is similar to the fact that we have the South Node here within the 4th house of the father. But seeing it as Sun Neptune gives us another piece of information that we did not have before.
Mm-hmm. And with the father, it's very much that sort of relationship. She adored him, and in fact, he was an artist, and she became an artist. And even went to the same art school he did and everything else like that. But the reason he was so unreliable was because he was usually very stoned and did not follow through on things. So there was the self-medication happening in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Also, she was extremely intelligent and always learning and curious, as you said. But for the most part, she lived on her emotions, and she felt like that was an appropriate thing to do because it fed her art. But then she would have to escape from that. So, yeah, it's all making a lot of sense.
And the other thing that West said, and the final thing that West said that I want to touch on, is this concept of the father having had the opportunity to have a lot of wealth and having that wealth destroyed or taken away, essentially. Here we have the Saturn. Like I said earlier, Saturn is exalted, and by virtue of his exaltation, we believe that Saturn should be able to deliver on a high promise, because planets will deliver on a promise that is proportionate to their level of essential strength. So here we have the Saturn essentially dignified by being in its exaltation. So our collective belief is that the Saturn has the ability to deliver on its promise. However, the retrogradation is something that we always have to pay attention to, because Betham's Centiloquium tells us that a planet retrograde is like a man infirm, stupefied, and solicitous. And here we have this Saturn retrograde, strong within itself, but retrograde, which means that even though the Saturn will desire to deliver based on his strength, the retrogradation ultimately causes that thing to be destroyed. So once again, this was most assuredly a fascinating chart, and West, we are grateful.
Thank you.
All righty then. That's about it for that.
Okay, so one thing is with the Neptune, I think a lot of people just kind of think that there's going to be a substance abuse, or that's an automatic call, but it doesn't have to be. And how do you, what kind of indicators to the rest of the chart do you look for to see if people can handle that amount of Neptune coming from people with, people in my life have a large Neptune and we don't drink. Just saying.
Yeah.
But we do have strong reactions to medication, like get me away from doctors, right? Yeah.
So that's a wonderful question that you ask, Lori. And the question that you're asking specifically about this Neptune can be asked about any part of our astrology. You know, what makes Venus mean laziness versus beauty?
Mhm.
What makes Jupiter mean wealth versus access? What makes Pluto mean death versus power? What makes the sun mean men in general versus vital force? What makes Mercury mean mind versus finances? You know, these this question that you're asking is the most perfect question. And it comes down to our astrology as an art of balances. And what I mean by that is that at any given point in time, an astrologer, a good astrologer, is only doing two things in the process of reading a chart. And those two things are we are assessing how strong a planet is to deliver on a particular outcome. And at the same time, we are assessing the quality of the outcome that that planet can deliver on. So, what is the quantity of strength a planet has to deliver on its promise? And what is the quality of outcome that planet will deliver with? Those are the two things. You know, is it going to be strong? Is it going to be weak? Is it going to be malefic? Is it going to be benefic? Those are the questions. Those are the only two questions that I'm consistently asking myself within my mind as I read through a chart. And the level of detail that I put on top of that comes from my own years and years and years of reading for people and giving readings to people. And there's a part of that that is inexplicable in a way because it boils down to experience and knowing that when I speak not only with the technical prowess of someone who studied technical astrology in a very deep way, but I also speak as someone who has years of experience behind me of working with people and of interpreting this science, basically interpreting these symbols, interpreting these things. And that interpretive ability is one that, yes, you can learn it in a class, but you also have to get the experience of reading countless charts and giving countless readings and giving yourself the opportunity to see under what conditions might someone's Neptune thing be alcoholism versus sainthood. Because on the spectrum of Neptune, we have both the alcoholic as well as the saint. On the spectrum of Neptune, we have both the Charles Manson and the Dalai Lama. Similarly, on the spectrum of Mars, we have both the Muhammad Ali as well as the Ted Bundy, because these things bleed into each other and we have to know which one of these things is going to be it. In order to be a police officer, you need to have a strong Mars. In order to be a thief, you also need to have a strong Mars. In order to be a murderer, you also need to have a strong Mars. So we have to know what combinations have the ability to lead someone or to incline someone to presenting one component versus the other. So within the context of this chart, where we see Libra rising, we already have some thoughts about how this person operates as a result of this person being Venus ruled. We already know that love is going to be a big deal for her. We already know that the love of communication, the love of connection, the love of creating meaningful connections is going to be a big deal for her. But the cardinality says that these are things that she can begin again and again. So she can begin relationships again and again. The starting of relationships is not something that's uncommon to her because that is something where that is someplace where she thrives. Within the heart of Libra is the seed stuff of wanting to be in relationship, but also within the heart of Libra is a deep and a resounding boredom. And a lot of people don't speak about the boredom that exists within the heart of the Libra, but the boredom is also there. And so the boredom is what causes the Libran type of person to not only want to be in relationship, but the boredom is also what causes the Libran type of person to want to break relationship, because that boredom is such an intrinsic sort of thing. This particular person also has the effect of many of the malefics in terms of the ascendant. She is having the Neptune contact. She is having the Mars contact. She is having the Saturn contact. She's having the Moon Pluto contact. So there are many things occurring within this that makes us want to believe that this is going to possibly be a more difficult sort of situation. She's also having the chart ruler in the 8th house. And the chart ruler in the 8th house, the chart ruler in the house of death and the lord of the house of death in the 1st house also has that dangerous component. Remember, I spoke about the danger that exists within the chart as well, and how the person is putting themselves in dangerous circumstances. And because the Venus is a benefic, Venus is in Taurus in the 8th house, Venus has the ability to save someone from the sort of difficulties that they put themselves in. And like Wes said to us, she was an aerialist, and that's a dangerous sort of thing to be doing. But that Venus in Taurus has the ability to make a person feel blessed. And that Venus in Taurus has the ability to make a person feel as if, yea, though I am in this 8th house of death, I have nothing to fear, because I know that I'm skillful, I know that I'm blessed, and I know that this Venus has the ability to save me, essentially. Because the Venus brings me luck and the Venus brings me fortune. But sometimes when a person finds themselves in that sort of situation, it can have an effect of causing them to lean a little bit too deeply into that. And it doesn't always serve a person well to lean so deeply into luck that they have, because it can cause them to live a little bit on the wild side, which we also see from having the ruler of the house of death in the 1st house. Ruler of the 1st house in the house of death, I go to death. Ruler of the house of death in my 1st house, but death also comes to me. So there's this relationship there that doesn't only have to do with the profession that she is doing, but when we see that sort of devil-may-care relationship, a daredevil relationship, essentially, someone going into the house, which is the 8th house is called Epicatophora. It's the gate of Hades. It's the beginning of the underworld. So someone willing going into that place where angels fear to tread, it creates the sort of internal circumstances for us to believe and for us to conjecture that the way how this person will interact with their Neptune contact will be through the use of things that further this daredevil relationship to life, or through the things that further this lack of boundaries within life, as opposed to this person becoming Mother Teresa on a pedestal in a church. You see?
Yeah, I mean, to me, and when I see Libra ascendant, I think facade, like a lot of energy being put into making a very beautiful facade.
Well,
too. But the real gist of my question was, these are, I mean, you're not reading for her. You're not reading, we're just experimenting on these charts. So in a real reading, you would approach it differently than you approach it as we're dissecting the chart. And how would you go about excavating that issue? Because my guess is that you don't go in and say, it looks like you've got a drinking problem. You know, it's like you would go in and do something else with that to figure out, you know, the so there's a lot of, I'm surprised coming back into astrology after I've been out of it for a while, but so many astrologers do just written reports. They don't really meet with the clients. And I'm like, I can't see how you can do that. So that's why I think that's why I'm trying to figure that out. And even, anyway, I've got my own opinion about that, but I know that that's kind of the crux of what I'm trying to suss out here. Is we just did use this chart as a teaching tool, not as a way to help somebody who has the chart. And how do you, there's no feedback, cold reading. How would you do that if you did have somebody on the other side?
You asked very great questions. And here are the answers. Well, first of all, a tiny point of correction, and you don't have to unmute, I'll just let you know that a cold reading is different from a blind reading. And the reason why they're different is because a cold reading within the 21st century is what a skeptic calls a reading, whatever type of reading, whether it's psychic reading, astrology reading, tarot reading. A cold reading is what skeptics call a reading when a person gives a reading that's so general and so vague it can apply to anyone. And then when they start to grab pieces of information that they've been given by the client. So the client nods their head or smiles, and then the practitioner, the astrologer, psychic, tarot person, picks up on that as a hint and keeps on saying things that generate more smiles or that generate more whatever. I am not such a person. And I'm not such a person because I can't even see any of you. Once I have this on Spotlight, I have you minimized in the corner. I don't want to see you. And the reason why I don't want to see you, and this is something that came to me as a child giving readings to people in Jamaica, I found it was always extraordinarily easier for me to do my job without seeing the person than it was for me to see a person and do my job, because a person's entire presence comes with far too much information. The presence that a person brings into a space comes with far too much information. And the minute I see a person, it clouds my judgment. Automatically, my brain shuts down because I no longer am able to see that chart. I'm only able to see that person. And there are many astrologers today who thrive on their ability to see their clients because they want to put a face to the story, because they thrive off of that seeing their client, because that fills in a lot of the gaps and it fills in a lot of the details. And seeing someone allows you to know, how can I talk to this person? What words will this person hear when I speak? That is not astrology, in my opinion. It's something else, but it's not astrology. Now, the reason why I do these blind readings, a blind reading is different. A blind reading is different because a blind reading assumes that I have all of the skillfulness and the prowess to actually perform astrologically within this moment. And I am specifically choosing to not have background information about a person because I specifically want to demonstrate the skill of astrology, not the helpful tool of astrology, but the skill of astrology. And astrology in demonstration is different from astrology in counseling practice. It's amazing how many times this has come up today. And at this point, it coming up for the third time for the day, it's really something I feel strongly charged about. And it isn't about anyone who's asked the question. It's about where this question originates from. The demonstration of the skill of astrology and the aptitude of astrology as a language to speak about the lives of people is different from the demonstration of astrology as a counseling tool. They're two different things. And who I am and who I show you I am in the process of demonstrating astrology, the skill, is a very different thing from who I am as Mychal, the counselor. Mychal, the astrological counselor. So a blind chart reading is not meant to be a representation of the work that I do with clients. Because when you have a client there, you obviously are having astrology as dialogue. And there is a very big space for astrology as dialogue because a lot of healing comes from astrology as dialogue. Healing comes to me through hearing someone tell their story. Healing comes to a person by hearing their story told through astrological terms. There's a very important place within our practice for astrology as dialogue. However, every astrologer should know how to practice astrology as monologue because we say our hypothesis is that astrology is a language by which we can speak about the concrete events within the lives of a person in concrete terms using the planets as the vocabulary of that language, using the planets as the letters of that language, which creates the stories of the lives of people. That is our assertion as astrologers, and we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to do that in a way that is cold, in a way that is as objective as possible, in a way that is as sterile as possible. Because when you come to a blind chart reading, you are essentially coming to an astrological cadaver course. I said this earlier today in the PCA1 cohort, and I'm saying it here to you. You're coming to a course where you are coming to see dissection in action and how that can possibly be done, not so that you can go out into the world and practice dissection in action, but so that you can go into the world and think within yourself, now that I've seen this done within this very sterile laboratory of this blind chart reading academy, how can I take those skills into the world and encroach those skills in my humanity so that when I open my mouth, I can deliver this astrology to others in a way that is compassionate, in a way that is humane, and in a way that shows the internal seed of humanity within me. That's how we're meant to work with clients. But that's not how we're meant to work within this sort of environment, because this sort of environment is an environment of measurement. How much was said? How much of it was accurate? How much wasn't said? How much should have been said? How much of what was said fits the realities of the life of this person for whom the reading was being given? Those are the measures within this sterile laboratory that we're in right now. And it's not supposed to be a feel-good space. It's not supposed to be a space that teaches you how to be a counselor. It's not supposed to be a space that teaches you how to hold compassionate healing space for others, because that's not the purpose of this container. I heard Rob Hand say this at UAC in 2018, and it brought tears to my eyes because that spoke so deeply within my heart as a seed of truth, because that's how I had always functioned within my life. Whenever I was asked to demonstrate this skill in action, this is how you do that. And when I saw him, that was essentially how he did it as well. And granted, he's Rob Hand, he's the very godfather of astrology itself. And I am me in the Bahamas, in my pajamas, reading some charts. The same thing applies, that when we want to see astrology, we should only see the astrology. We shouldn't see Mychal, the hypnotherapist and astrologer. We shouldn't see Mychal, the counselor and astrologer. We shouldn't see Mychal, the life coach and astrologer. We should just see the astrology. The reason why a lot of astrologers today have to give written reports is because they haven't fully consolidated their identity as an astrologer. And it's far easier for me to sit down and give a written report to someone where I can cross-reference every single book on my shelf and then send someone a written report than to sit down in a container like this, in a space like this, and read blind. Because the blind chart reading is a very dangerous thing. Every time you give a blind chart reading, you put your entire reputation on the line. And it's something that is a very scary thing. And it's a luxury to sit down home and write your 3-page double-space 0.12 font Times New Roman report to someone, telling someone about their astrology. because it puts a wall of distance between you and that client, and it allows the client to feel as if, well, maybe if I meditate on this for 2 more days, it will become more accurate to me. This is not astrology. This is not astrology. As we look to the antiquity of astrology, no astrologer in the 1700s was pulling out their MacBook, their iPad, their whosoever pad, and writing down their delineation and sending it off to anyone. Because astrology has always been a living art. And one of the curses of 21st century astrology is that the written report is a possibility. This is not the way. Astrology has always been a consultative field. We consult people. Some of the greatest astrologers in the world only communicate with clients via the written report. This is not the way. And I would hope that the example that I've left through these blind chart readings could at least spark something within all of you to feel as if you too have the ability to go out and give people readings face to face. Now is the times of COVID. This is a fact. Maybe we're not going and giving readings to people face to face, but you're not going to give a reading to someone face to face shouldn't be because you don't have the ability to do so, especially if you're calling yourself an astrologer. That is not the way. So we have to know as a community, what is our powers? What is it that we have that we bring into this field, that we bring into this world that says that we've attained some level of mastery? What can you show at the end of the day to say that you actually know how to practice and to show that you actually know how to be an astrologer? There's a very big difference between someone learning astrology and someone being an astrologer. And there's a very big difference between someone knowing how to speak astrology and someone being an astrologer. And when I go around and I see people giving talks, giving presentations, giving lectures and all of these things, it's always evident to me between the person who can only speak astrology versus the person who knows how to be an astrologer. They're two very different concepts. And I would hope that all of you take from this space the ability to practice astrology in the real world. No other field is as glorified as this field of astrology, where we could sit down on our high horse from our home and type someone up a reading and send it to them. The counselor doesn't type somebody up a reading and send it to them. And then you have to ask yourself, what can you possibly type and send to someone? The only readings that I've ever seen typed out and sent to people have been readings that have, one, either been very vague, two, been very obtruse to the point where you can't even interpret it. It could apply to anyone. Or three, where the readings have been extraordinarily psychological. I don't know if concrete astrology allows itself or has within itself the ability to be typed up and emailed to someone as a written report. Because there's something intrinsically magical about this practice, and there's something intrinsically magical about sitting here and cracking your skull open and opening your mouth and speaking astrology. Concrete astrology is a spoken art. Astrology is a spoken art. And the astrologer who is sitting down with the ability to write all day long isn't the astrologer who's in the field getting their hands dirty and practicing astrology. The astrologer who has the ability to sit down and write a book every single year isn't an astrologer who's in the field getting their hands dirty and being with people and interacting with people and learning astrology through the lives of their clients. No other counselor does this. No other consultant does this. No other field has this concept of the written report. You go to see a doctor, you go to see a lawyer, you go to see a counselor, you go to see a priest for absolution, you come to see your astrologer, and the astrologer of the 21st century should be equipped to see their clients when they come. That is what I hope we can have. And then the discussion of how to work with clients comes up, because then we actually have clients work to know, how should I be with someone? But in conclusion of this whole thing, when we actually work with people, it's evident to us how to work with that person. Because if it isn't evident to you how to work with someone through the process of sitting down with someone, then you're not paying attention. And the ability to pay attention is fundamentally the first thing of the astrologer. How do I pay attention to this mammoth amount of information in the front of me, and how do I begin to organize this information? That's all we do as astrologers. As astrologers, all we are doing is organizing information. And when you sit down and you see a client come to you, or you turn on your computer screen and you see the client on the other side of the screen, the information that comes from that person tells you, how do I organize what it is I have to say to this person? If you see that someone is going to have some great tragedy in their lives, how do you say that to a person? Is it even important to say? If someone is coming to you specifically because they want to know about fertility and about their fertility issues, is it important for you to dig up the bones of their past and talk about their past relationships and how, as a result of their past relationship experiences, the prospect of even getting pregnant is something that terrifies them? Or is your job as an astrologer at that point to specifically talk about the thing that that person has come there to know? As an astrologer, as a good astrologer, you have the entire life of a person on a table, and you're able to see the entire life of a person. And your job is to determine, of this person's entire life story, what are the things that are worth speaking about based on the questions that this person has asked me to speak to. Because if you can do that, and if you can pay attention in that way, and if you could listen to people, people will tell you what they want to hear. People's energy will also tell you what they don't want to hear. But your humanity within you should also tell you, if I was this client with this chart, with these strengths, but also with these challenges, how much of this would I want to hear within this hour-long session that I have? And that falls to the discretion of every astrologer. So I hope that that was in some way beneficial or helpful. And at the end of the day, I hope that more than we go out into the world and be astrologers, I hope that we remember how to be human. Yes, be excellent in your astrology. Yes, be a master at astrology. Yes, be the greatest astrologer in the world. But have things within your life that reaffirms your humanity, because you aren't just an astrologer helping humans, you're a human helping humans. And we're meant to know how to bring our humanity into every sphere of our lives, into everything that we do, so that when someone leaves our presence, they leave not only feeling as if they've had a moment of astrology, but they leave feeling as if they've had a moment where they've sat down with the wisest source in the universe, speaking through you, telling them that ultimately at the end of the day, it's going to be okay. And that's the goal of our astrology, that we can step away from someone's life far enough to give them a bird's eye view to see, hey, even with all the things that you've been through, at the end of the day, you're alive, it's going to be okay. And here are some of the ways how you can assist yourself in making it be okay based on the things that are showing up within your chart. And that is good astrology. And that is what all of us should strive for. All right. That's about it for me. And that's about it for us. We are at the end of our time. We are literally at the end of the time. It's 9 o'clock on the dot. I am so grateful that all of you have chosen to be here week after week for the last 12 weeks to sit in this space. And I really do hope that this work and putting this work out in the world allows people to feel as if there is something within this astrology that's worth exploring, and that there is something in this astrology that has the ability to speak to our human experience. We're going to take a break for a couple of weeks while I myself regroup and I myself take a vacation so that I can come back into this space having more to share. But until then, I leave you all with love and peace and hope and astrology forever. Until we meet again. Have a good night.